Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're at. I'm Leslie Carr. I'm the head of engineering of Pando, and I'm currently in San Francisco. I really believe strongly in hiring folks from non-traditional backgrounds because I myself am from a non-traditional background. I got my start in this industry as a doing tech support, repairing computers and servers, and I've been able to move my way through network engineering, DevOps, and SRE, and all the way to executive engineering leadership. I'm really excited about the panel today. We have some really great folks. And Ashley, how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Ashley. I'm the head of customer success at Woven. Woven is a software that helps hiring teams structure technical work simulations so you can get a read on a candidate's skill set. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I have a long history of hiring folks from non-traditional backgrounds. I would like to categorize myself as someone with a non-traditional background. I thought for sure I was going to be an attorney. I was like the child of two attorneys. That was my path. And here I am now in tech and customer success. So it just goes to show that you never know where you're going to end up.
And I'm glad you're here. Erin C., how about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Leslie. Hi, my name is Erin Cannon. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a director of the training and people development team at Paradigm. We are a DEI specialization firm that looks at both the structural as well as the individual components of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can embed those within the workforce and our workforce practices. So I am in Austin, Texas. I, like everybody else on the panel, also have come from a path that is non-linear, and the value of that, I think, is just really impactful, both in my individual journey and in my individual growth and learning, as well as when I'm thinking about, building out on my team and helping our clients to build out the way that they're thinking about their workforce as well. So I'm really excited to be talking about this today.
And Erin W., how about yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me. So happy to be back on a panel. I'm one of the founders here at Team.ai. We're a little 40-person tech startup that has a big mission to change the way the world works together. We're going to start with the way that you interview and hire. So that's what we're focused on here. I feel so thankful to be in this discussion. I was using Wikipedia to keep up in the first conference rooms when I got into the tech industry. Having experience in recruiting and seeing non-traditional teams built, not just one role, I oftentimes feel it's a matter of will, not whether they can or can't, but whether they want to or whether they will. And so I'm excited to get out and educate on how they can and they will if they want to.
That's great. And for everyone watching, are you from a non-traditional or non-linear background in your career? If so, I'd love to see your story in the chat. So we talk about diverse backgrounds and the importance of having diverse backgrounds inside a company. But what is a diverse background? That's something that it feels like everyone has a different answer for. So I'd love to hear some of your answers. What do you think a diverse background is?
Yeah, I can start. What's interesting about the word diverse, right? And everybody who's here, I want you to just think about this for a second. What do you think of when you hear the word diverse? I can guarantee that we all have something very specific that comes to mind, but that most of those things are different from each other, because a person can't be diverse, right? An organization can be diverse, a situation can be diverse, because it really is a matter of having a lot of different things. I think similarly, when we all think of non-traditional, that might evoke something very specific, but really it can be a myriad, things that can build into that non-traditional background. So I think one of the things that can be really important to think about when we're talking about hiring or promoting jobs to non-traditional backgrounds is really trying to allow ourselves to be more expansive in what that means, and not limited to the one or two things that we personally think of. And a great way to do that is to engage other people, and get other ideas about what it means as well, so that you can, create more of a full picture and full story.
That's a really good point. And I really like your point about how you need to assess the current state of your organization to see where you have gaps or perhaps homogenous culture.
Yeah, and I was just going to add really quickly, Erin. Too, I feel like one of the early challenges in this is that diverse means hiring something different. And when you actually blow it up to the level you just described, it makes it really helpful. And in fact, I don't think that's where the conversation starts, because we're all pretty much the same. Like at a DNA level, we're very, very, very much similar. And so when you're hiring someone diverse, you're hiring someone very similar to you. The question is how self-aware are you? How do you view yourself, versus the folks you're interviewing? But I think awareness is an area to focus as well as at the beginning of this discussion.
Definitely. Because I've definitely seen a pitfall in a couple of organizations, including ones I've been a part of, where when they hear diverse, they think, oh, well, we have to hire someone who's not white or Asian, but still comes from Stanford and Google. I'm like,
yeah.
Yes, you are getting some axes, but you aren't really, really creating a fully diverse culture.
And that's such a good point, Leslie. I mean, you think about, there's like obvious diversity characteristics, the ones that are visible or that make themselves really apparent in a recruiting process, like things on a resume or things that you can see on LinkedIn. But it's really not until you get into a conversation with candidates where you can really start to see some of the other potentially non-visible, or, if you think about like the iceberg of diversity, we're, so much of the time we're only talking about up here. And there's a whole universe of possibilities that can really add to the, the fabric of your company that aren't so obvious. So that's a great point.
I really love that, Ashley. And to yes, and you, I think that a place to really start to lean in there is also thinking about, when a company is doing their hiring, when you're doing your hiring, what are the questions that you're asking? What are the things that you're putting in those job descriptions that might actually be limiting based on that viewpoint, as opposed to opening it up to that diversity in a way that is meaningful and different from what you already have on the table and in the workforce.
Yeah, I think that transitions really well to the next point, which is your job description. That tends to be the kicking off point of any recruiting process. As a hiring manager myself, I know how important it can be. And as an engineer myself, I know how much I hate writing and therefore often try to put it off. One interesting thing that I've seen as a failure case in job descriptions is everyone wants to put in they base their job description off their perfect engineer, who's probably someone who's been at the company as long as the company's been around. Of course, this person is going to be an expert in every technology of the software that they probably helped create the stack. But that's not a realistic goal, and that's not necessarily who you're looking for. So what can we do to make a better job description and to get a better pool of applicants to increase our diversity? And Ashley, I know you're an expert at job descriptions.
Sure. I also have a lot of strong opinions about job descriptions. I think it has to be skills-based. Skill. If that's like the only thing you take away, it's based on skills. And I think what we end up doing is, and I know Erin W has a really good stat about this, what was it, 70 something percent of hiring managers are hiring for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a staggering number. They always rely on short codes. So I probably don't have to, we'll get lots of chuckles in the comments. It's like, well, what are you looking for out of this insert title here? This many years experience, this kind of title. Those are not skills. Years of experience is not a skill. It's not. So it's being really thoughtful in your job description about keeping yourself accountable to the skills that are required and what the candidate will learn on the job. So I think that's like my number one.
Yeah, can we do this for the rest of the webinar? Just to recap for those listening, we have access to data here at Team.ai. We pulled a pretty large customer base. 77% of hiring managers were hiring for a role they've never hired for before. 77% hiring for a role they've never hired for before. So I love Ashley's point that the JDs need to be skills focused. Of course, there's the idea of writing job descriptions in a more inclusive way, but I find, not to be too hard hitting, that that's not enough, right? We're talking about how to write an advertisement so that it advertises better. And the question is, how do we build more inclusive teams? When you write a job description, it's not the same as an interview plan. So what I love about Ashley hitting on skills is whatever you put in that job description should be skills, which should map to work they're going to do. And that discussion should map to an interview plan. And we're not seeing a lot of that. You hear it's a top of funnel issue. Oh, we're not getting applicants, but actually you did. You said things like, oh, can we see a few more candidates before we make a decision, and things like that. So we'll get deeper into the process, but I get really passionate about JDs don't fill jobs. I've never seen a human hire a piece of paper or vice versa, So that's, I think, short, skills driven, and actionable, tie it back to the plan.
And I'm going to also double underline something that Ashley, you said, and Erin, you just touched on too, which is those skills. There is a difference between the skills that somebody needs from the get-go when they first come in the door versus the skills that they can and will need to learn on the job. And so being really clear about what are those skills that are necessary for somebody to succeed in a role versus what are the skills that they're going to, need to build up along the way anyway. Every new job, you have to learn new skills, regardless of if you have, the experience of, writing the stack at a previous organization. When you go to a new one, you're still going to have to learn the ins and outs of that org. So being really clear about what is necessary and required, Ashley, is the way that you put it, versus what are the things that can and should be learned.
Definitely.
And that touches on, I was going to say, that touches on what Erin W. just said, which is it's an advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us, when we're looking for new opportunities, most of the time it's because we want to grow in an area or we want to learn in a particular area. So being able to highlight what you will learn on the job is a great way to open up your applicant pool and drive more candidates.
You know what, Ashley, not to hijack this, but we can make it more than an advertisement, right? Why can't we make it an accountability tool? Just roll with me for a second, because if you want to build an inclusive team, you have to be willing to hire folks who, for example, have never had a VP title before into a VP job, right? Or a non-technical, dare I say it, non-technical engineering leader, right? But what if you actually wrote that on the job description? What if you had to write that on the job description that you were open to hiring a VP who had never been a VP before? Because that would hold you really accountable to sourcing those folks and interviewing those folks and coming up with the reasons why they're not your VP, other than they've never had the title before.
Definitely. And I think this is also where a well-written job ladder or job rubric can really help you, because if you already know what you're assessing all of your current employees on, then you know what you should be looking for. A lot of times people don't go back and reference that job ladder, which means that their interview plan and their career growth plan aren't aligned.
Mm-hmm. And it can change too. So for a lot of roles where you're going to hire multiple, I just experienced this here at Woven. I came from an organization where I had 40 customer success managers, and the way you hire your 40th CSM is very different than the way you hire your first, your second, your third. So it's important to also make sure that you're keeping those really fresh and appropriate for the skill set that you need for the number of the position that you're hiring.
Definitely. And since we touched about it, I'd love to move on to the topic of how do you design your interview plan? For me, it was really important to make sure that I thought about what is the average day on the job for an engineer at Pando, and that I'm assessing that, not assessing other things such as the infamous, algorithms questions that are like, solve this chessboard. We aren't a chessboard solving AI company, therefore I don't really care if you can solve a chessboard. Instead, I actually know Ashley from using her company Woven's product. They have a lot of very realistic scenarios, such as add a component to a web page using a JavaScript framework. That is something I expect everyone to do every day. And as well, I think like engineering leaders often forget that one of the big differentiators between an okay engineer and a great engineer is actually their communication skills. A great engineer can teach everyone around them. A great engineer interacts smoothly and very well with product and design, is able to ask the right questions, and is able to tell product and design what they can realistically do. And so for me, creating my interview plan, I had scenarios where I created interactions between the product manager and the candidate, and our design lead and the candidate, in order to be able to assess those skills. I thought that was very important. What's something that you all do to think about creating your interview plan so that you're fairly judging everyone?
I was gonna say, I can start since you teed me up. Rubrics for sure, and work simulations, whether that's asynchronously or live with the candidate, in person or over Zoom. Our CEO Wes and founder, he has a great phrase that I love to use all the time. Says, if you want to see how good a dancer is, you have to watch them dance. And I think it's the same way in an interview process. You've got to see how would they actually do on the job. And that includes things like really picking out like what are those core competencies of the job and assessing them in a way that also makes the candidate feel like they're able to perform their best. So I think the other things that are really important when you think about structuring your interview plan is, what is that candidate experience at each step? Mm-hmm. So is it, their relationship with the recruiter and setting them up for that next step? Is it prep guides? Is it, these are the topics that we're going to cover? Is it making sure that your interviewers are trained on best practices? Is it making sure that you're using like the STAR method, for example, your situation, task, action, result? Being able to encourage candidates to share stories from personal or professional. So it's like creating that environment where you can get a good, confident read on skill set without, creating anxiety or adverse impact or any of those other things.
Yeah, and I want to follow up just with one quick bonus of making sure that your interviewers are creating the best experience. I've had the cases where we've decided to pass on a candidate, but the candidate had such a good time and thought we were such a good company, they've referred their friends that we've hired. So, it costs nothing to be really nice and polite to a candidate, and you might get a great referral and get another person.
I really like that, Leslie. And I think that as an additional point on that, not only are you opening it up to, maybe they can apply later on to a position that is better suited, or, the referrals, I think all of that is great. I think also there are a couple of different ways that people think about interviews, right? And some people think about interviews as, a candidate is proving to me something. a candidate is trying to get in the door here, and I am the gatekeeper that is throwing tricks at them to see if they can solve the riddle. It's a mixed metaphor, but I think a better way of approaching the interview process is really thinking about it as a partnership. And this is kind of what both of you were talking about, Ashley and Leslie, which is that you want that candidate to succeed. You should want that candidate to succeed. You should want to give them the things that they need, whether it's, the preparation, the list of skills that you're looking for, all of those things, so that they can bring their best to the interview, and that you're really working in partnership to get at whether or not they have those skills. And I think that this kind of plays into a couple of these questions that have come in from Alex around, how do you level the playing field for people who are not good at describing their skills? It's actually quite simple. You set up the interview process in a way that doesn't ask them to prove those things, but shows them working through the process themselves, so you can glean that in the room or in the space. So I think that, there's that added bonus of being able to, when you treat it like a partnership, it's good for the candidate, it's good for you, and it gives you a better sense of whether or not they'd be an add in that role.
Yeah, and Ashley and Erin just gave us all a long list of best practices on the workflow, which is actually really nice to hear. It's so tactical. Like any one of those things you just said would be an improvement for most processes. I have found if you're sitting in the seat right now, nodding your head, being like, I agree with all those things, but we got a bunch going on, and how do I do that at scale? I would just hit that really quick. Here are some just key pillars that I've leaned on for a long time for this discussion. One, you have to have a philosophy in place. So at the top level, it has to be a philosophy, i.e., we believe in structured interviewing as a philosophy. And in believing in that, we're going to agree that 80% of our interview plan or interview architecture for the company is the same for every job. It's something we all agree on here as a leadership team. We'll call that fixed variables. They don't change, or maybe we iterate quarter or annual, like as a committee. The other 20% is custom variables. And that's where, each team gets to feel like the special snowflake that they all are, of course. Okay, can we agree on a philosophy? So one is agreeing on a philosophy. Then when it comes to the 80-20, what parts tend to make this work? Well, some things that should be really, really consistent, not just in your company, but in the market. The first interview should not be with the hiring team. It should be with somebody trained to pre-assess, like a product like Woven, or a recruiter, or
love the plug.
Right?
I love the plug. Great.
Right? Something, Leslie as a partner will give me questions to use in a first round interview such that it's a really effective process after the fact. So stage one should also always be a pre-qual. Stage two should be the direct hiring manager. Now I'm going to ruffle some feathers with my tech teams out there, but before you give them the tech assessment, let them talk to the person they're going to work for and talk specifically about the project they're going to work on. And both of you are going to benefit from that. Promise. So those things tend to be pretty consistent. Cross-functional interview. I love this. You all talked about it, so I'm just hitting that hard. Yes. Don't hire X team without having them talk to someone on Y team. Have cross-functional be a standard interview guide that anyone from one team to the other can interview with. Values interviews, again, standard. You have values in your company, you can have a values-driven discussion. SIM, so interactive interview. You said it, Ashley and Erin. I want to call it, the only reason I'm hitting this again is this is not a take-home. It's emulative work, right? It's collaborative usually, so that's a big deal. And the other thing is, if we do this one well, it actually indicates leveling as well. And a lot of times what happens is folks are getting leveled on the back end of the process through bias instead of based on an objective process. But your SIMs could be gradient, i.e., engineer with X level should get to milestone 3, engineer with Y level gets to milestone 5, and there's discussion in between. And last but not least, and I'll wrap up, is the reverse interview. I would implore all of us to do this. The very last interview of your process with every candidate, is the candidate interviewing the hiring manager, the other way around. 30 minutes, no questions off the table. Prepare the candidate for success. Ask questions based on what you've heard, what you've found, any concerns you have. Our job is to answer them. And what you find is within 24 hours, both sides have data-driven decisions made, because we've now balanced out that information asymmetry that happens every step of the way. So that's scaling.
And
Yeah.
one argument I've heard a couple of times, and almost felt myself, is, well, if we open up our pipeline to be more broad, especially for entry-level positions, I don't have time to screen everyone. And I myself was in that position. We had 3 full-time engineers. I was trying to hire several more, and it's like, how the heck am I going to hire everyone without overwhelming my engineers? That's actually why I use Ashley's product, Woven, because it allowed me to get a great assessment of someone's skills without having to overwhelm my engineers. There are also many other products on the market, or if you have a great recruiting team or recruiting partner, that's exactly what they're trained in doing, is doing those first level assessments. So find a partner who's an expert at this, so that you can outsource some if you don't have enough bandwidth in-house.
I think you bring up a really good point there, Leslie, which is that it's all fine and good for us to talk theoretically about what we want, how we want a more diverse workforce, how we would love to get people from non-traditional backgrounds into the workforce, into roles. But when the rubber hits the road, we're all really busy. Nobody I know has ever been hiring for a role because they're thinking ahead about something that they might need 3 years from now, right? You're already past the point where you desperately need that person, and other people are having to do the work. And so it can become really stressful. And when we're in those stressful situations, that's when we have more bias. And that's when we switch to the area where it's like, I'm just going to do the more comfortable thing and the thing that's the easiest. And that's when we lose sight of, maybe our broader goals, Erin, of, this is our mission and this is our values, and these are the things that we have said we wanted to commit to, but those are the first thing that go out the door. And so, I want to challenge everybody here who's listening to really think about that and really commit to the discomfort and the slowness that it might take in order to actually be more expansive in your hiring.
Erin, let's talk about 2 clear use cases where this happens every day, right? I want to build diverse teams, and then the hiring manager defaults to resume screening, right? Whereas when we work with them, we say this: you're not allowed to resume screen, because our data shows if you take between 7 and 9 introductions from us, you make a hire, and we build diverse teams. So don't resume screen, just take the interviews, right? And it's really hard to get to, still, even with data, even with success, they still want to default. And it's like, but I see something and I know it'll save me time if I don't take it, right? So, and then you see the same thing in the onsite when it's, oh, hey, can we cut that short? Can we just pull the plug on that? And how many times they said, absolutely not. What are you talking about? We scheduled that interview. We thought something made sense to have them set aside the entire day or 2 blocks, right? We're going to sit there through that painful experience and learn together. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about it so we can get better for the next one and don't waste anyone else's time, right? It's just so uncomfortable, but that's the only way to get there. That's why I love you calling it out, Erin. It's like, it's the uncomfortable. We got to wade into the uncomfortableness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that really ties in well to a question from Caitlin about debriefs. I think debriefs are very important, even if like the forms that folks have filled out are more definitive, because we can have this feedback loop. I can say, okay, wow, this person really missed the mark. What did we miss in an earlier stage that we need to have a question on, or something like that, to make sure that doesn't happen again? Or, wow, this person was great. What stood out? What can we do? Maybe we want to change our job ad to emphasize that, because we realize that is really important in what we're looking for, right? Maybe we change what the recruiter screen is. So it's always using the data you have to constantly improve your process and constantly tweak. And I think that plus the ability to make sure that you're calibrating amongst all interviewers is why in-person debriefs are so useful.
Agreed. I will just add one thing to that, which is that it's really important in those in-person debriefs. And Leslie, you already said this, but to re-emphasize the point of pairing those debriefs with, Caitlin, what you're saying here, the feedback forums, or making sure that people are doing those individually before coming together is important. But additionally, it's really important to think about the power dynamics in the room during those debriefs, and making sure that the people who are maybe not the hiring manager or people who aren't the highest ranked employee at the company are speaking first, because that can really anchor people into those opinions in a way that can maybe take away some of the purpose of a debrief.
Yeah. One great practical tip. I mean, I think we all know at the end of the day, the hiring manager, can make the call like yay or nay, do I want this person on my team? But the hiring committee can each have their own ownership area. They can be the DRI for example, the technical skill set or the, communication skill set. I would strongly encourage you not to have a culture fit, because that is a black box of bias, but it could be something like a values fit. Maybe you do a values interview, and by having each of those DRIs in place, you can start to level those conversations and not have DRI, directly responsible individual, if you were wondering what that was. But having somebody be able to own that point so that it can even the playing field when you're in those conversations.
Yeah. And something I've occasionally found helpful is if there's a hiring manager who isn't involved in the process, having them sit in and make sure everything stays on track, make sure that I, as a hiring manager, am being unbiased. That can really help.
Yeah. One of the things we practice in and preach and practice is hiring manager debriefs after every hiring manager interview. So you practice your debrief muscle by having the recruiter do a debrief with the candidate after every hiring manager interview. That's the first level of 360. And it's good practice for the hiring manager by the time they get into to lead the panel on the decision, as Ashley pointed out. But I think it's an important topic. We in most of the scorecards we see, it's very rare to have all strong yes or all strong no, especially if you've worked very hard to put qualified talent in front of the team. So one thing I'll just say, I think Erin was hinting at, is having the data in front of you too, whether you're the recruiter or the hiring manager, and being able to say, hey, somebody who's typically a little more quiet, you're kind of agreeing, but I'm reading here that you don't agree with that. Can I give you space to talk about that here? Because I'd love to learn more. Is really powerful. Actually, you can turn the whole decision just by letting them talk and just giving them that double click. So just having in front of you, making sure that as a hiring manager, that you take the time, no matter how busy you are, that 5 minutes before the debrief to pull up all the data you have so you can really drive that conversation with an open mind.
Yeah. And related, there's a question from Stanley about, why do hiring managers go back to their default of, only sourcing folks from Stanford and resume reviews for someone from one of, Facebook, Google, Netflix?
Oh, can I take
What's been your experience?
Well, one, we already said this, but I'm going to restate it. 77% of them have no clue what they're doing. And when you're making a decision for the first time, you're going to naturally seek signs of confidence behind you in that decision. So if I'm a hiring manager in the tech industry and I'm afraid I'm going to mess up, I have a better chance of not getting fired if the person I mess up on comes from Stanford, because at least I can be like, look, they came from Stanford, right? So it's sad but true. So if you have a non-typical background and you're interviewing with a bunch of typical backgrounds, don't be surprised if the outcomes are not in your favor. If you have someone with more experience or who comes from your background, you're going to have a lot more success. I can just tell you that right off the bat. The second piece is, I think, honestly, Leslie, there aren't enough of us out there educating. So the reason the hiring teams default to behaviors because they don't have a new behavior to follow suit. There's not enough examples out there. So we can talk about metrics and diversity and all the like. I have found with certain teams, sometimes it's this simple. All your dreams can come true if you can do this. 85% of the time or more, when you schedule an interview, show up. Just start there. Just start that one metric. Until you can do that as a team, don't worry about anything else. Once you do that, here's your hiring process. Between 15 and 20 business days to go from recruiter call to offer in hand. And do that 85% of the time or better. And if you can do that with all the other things we're talking about, if you can just do those things consistently, the outcome will blow your mind. But it is so hard for people to do that. It's as hard as it sounds to start going to the gym every day without a trainer or the right motivation. But it could be that simple. It could be that simple as showing up because you care about the candidate's experience. That's why we show up when we schedule an interview. And executing consistently, because they're just measuring how we execute in the company. So when Ashley makes her company's customers all look better, or hiring with Woven, then they're like, that's great. I want to go over there because that company knows how to execute.
I want to just double click really quickly on something you just said, Erin, which is around that if I hire somebody from Stanford, then I feel more confident in that I'm not going to get in trouble for it. I think there's a secondary thing that's happening there as well, which is, if I went to Stanford and I see that somebody else went to Stanford, then I feel more confident in that person because I know what their education was, right? We have these things called similarity biases that, we at Paradigm talk about in our trainings and in our coursework, where that can be a driver without us knowing. We're not necessarily doing it on purpose, but that can be a driver for if we decide we think somebody is qualified for a job. Which is why, to your question, Nicole, around do these suggestions change when specifically talking about non-traditional backgrounds, I think that the way that they change is they become even more important to hit on and even more important to talk about, in the debrief in every stage of the process to make sure that bias mitigation is happening as much as it can, because people do lean back on their, on the things, the people that are most like them, and the things that they have confidence in, because we feel confident in ourselves. So that can happen.
Definitely. And before we run out of time, first off, I want to encourage everyone watching to put questions in the comments section in the chat. But one thing I noticed from Amy was the importance of having a system in place to help folks from a non-traditional background once they've started. So what are some tips? Because no one wants to hire someone and have it not work out. So how can you best support people?
Amy, I loved that you asked this question. I wrote it down on my desk, or that you made this comment. I wrote down, Amy, holistic. And because this is something that I think about all of the time, and when we're talking to clients, I think about all of the time, because it's one thing to have a process that brings people in the door, but if you are not prepared to support folks once they are in, then they're not going to succeed. And so one of the most important things to think about is before you hire somebody, before you even post that job, right? Think about what you are doing internally at the organization that is going to be supportive of people from different backgrounds. And if you don't know what those specific things are, I encourage you to ask other people and to work with other organizations to really figure out some of those things that you're not thinking about. Because again, again, to your point, Amy, if you don't have those supports in place internally, that person or those people are going to fail. And they're going to be blamed for that failure when really it's a failure of the organization.
Yeah. For me, I like to make sure I encourage a culture of open questions, because there might be a question which you don't know. And one of the things is I find if one person doesn't know the answer to a question, usually a lot more people don't know, right? And so if you make sure you have help channels on your company's Slack, so people can go and find out information, and that you have a culture of celebrating asking questions, right? You want You want someone to feel like asking questions is a positive trait, not like they're going to be made fun of or judged poorly for asking questions. And I think that's so important. And turns out for everyone of every background that I hire, everyone enjoys having that kind of open culture.
A practice that we do here at Woven is we designate a first friend. So the role of the first friend in your first 30, 60, 90 days is to be that, a friend, be able to have non-work chatter. That is such an important part of being new, is feeling like you have a genuine connection with the people that you work with. But they are also the designated, ask me the like, what Zoom are we in? What Google Doc are we looking at? Do we have any documentation about this? And if we don't, get that feedback loop in, but somebody that they can feel really comfortable asking, of course, asking questions of everybody, but even like, I feel like I've asked this 5 times, but I'm still not getting it, having a really safe place to do so.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's like, man, even with new hires, you have the same problem, but then 10x when you're trying to build a team that looks different than your current team, which is it's the little chats that happen after they start, right? It's the inside joke that's been funny for 6 months that maybe that just doesn't fit anymore. Maybe it didn't fit to begin with, but who knows? But the point is, it really doesn't fit now, and you know, are we aware of that? I just want to take a shot, Evelyn. I love your question about risk. I have a tip for you, which is let's not try to change that perception. That's a perception problem that you've described there, the risk they see on us folks with non-traditional backgrounds. Instead of trying to change that, let's lean into it. The folks that view us as risk, piece of cake, not our squad, right? The ones who view us as potential, that's our squad. And I love what Analia said, because it really comes back to what the organization's capable of. Erin, you hit on this too. It's, as a recruiter, you know, if I interview you and you're not senior enough for the role, I'm not going to tell you that you're not senior enough, because that's really just a measurement internally. The truth is, you are a mid-level engineer on the cusp of senior, and right now we're putting engineer number 2 on the team, and I really need a level of autonomy that I can't move with you right now, but you'd be an amazing number 3, number 4 on this team. I see exactly how you can slot in, and then we would have the support to actually mentor you and grow, and actually having that full picture of how that person would be successful if they were to join. You know, look for people that are communicating like that. You found 4 on this call, and none of us do the same job. So we're out there and we work at orgs, but key in on those in interviews. You know, when you're in an interview, it's 2 ways, and you're driving that conversation. And when you hear those signals, like they can't support you, pull out before they tell you that they can't take a risk on you. That's the other answer. Like, you know, so don't worry about that. I think find the potential. The risk is just a wrong word, if you ask me. It's all about potential.
I want to add one thing to that, because I think something that Evelyn highlights here is that there is some flexibility that gets built in when you're from a white or a dominant group in an organization, where you get to maybe ask some of these questions or phrase things differently than you would if you were, you know, part of a non-dominant group in that room. And so I really encourage folks who are part of the dominant in whatever the room is to really be in charge of advocating for some of the things, Erin, that you're saying, and really be in charge of like being very explicit about some of the things that you're saying, so that we're not leaving it up to the people who are from those non-dominant groups to have to speak up.
Definitely. Which brings us to a good point about being an ally, right? All of us have been relatively successful in our careers. And so now we're all in positions of power where we can make sure that we're good allies. One great piece of advice I got about being an ally myself was make sure you don't just give advice, make sure you also find opportunities, right? So yeah, if I have someone junior, don't just give them advice about how to be senior. Find a project they can work on if they work for you. find one of your friends who is hiring and send their resume over, and really think about what actions you can do to sponsor someone, not just give advice. What do you three think about how you can be a better ally?
Well, I'm going to just chime in first because I love what Erin C just said about leveraging a position of privilege. And I think that is, doing that with intent, not to put words in your mouth, Erin, but I am very much in a position of privilege and leveraging it with intent, using that to give access, to create opportunity, to actually facilitate it is one, but also to keep listening is the sort of tip I have for folks who look like me, because I have learned too that, sometimes allies are helpful speaking up. Sometimes they're more helpful listening and not speaking up, and trying to figure out which situation you're in before you speak up is, I think, a tip I've learned, that I could share for those in the room. Sometimes listening is the best way to leverage that privilege. Doesn't always mean taking action.
I think another good way to be an ally is to be able to amplify someone's perspective. So instead of saying, oh, I'm an ally because I understand this group, or I've listened to this podcast about what this community feels, really think about the individuals on your team and what that individual's perspective is and how that can influence how you build your team or build your organization or build the culture of the company. Be able, I think, leverage, amplify, whatever you can do to be able to translate that perspective into a larger audience is probably the best thing that you can do. And not assume that because you have a lot of insert label here, friends or experience.
Yeah, Leslie, you used, actually I've heard all three of these words used in this conversation. There's ally, there's advocate, and there's sponsor, right? And all of these have different roles to play at different junctures. So, and to be an ally, I think I don't have anything really meaningful to add to what Erin, you, and Ashley have already said. To be an advocate is really to do some of the things that you were saying, Leslie, which is to find those opportunities, and sometimes behind closed doors, when the person that you're supporting isn't there, and really helping to make sure that people know that this person should have these opportunities. And then there's sponsorship, which is, when you are in those positions of the utmost power within an organization, you can really use the power that you have to help uplift other people in a way that is consistent and in a way that is very clear, so that you have you're helping to forge a path in partnership with that person. And so I think, depending on where anybody is in their career, we have the power to be one or two or three of these things. And to Erin's point, it will vary based on your relationship to a person and your relationship within an organization. But really thinking about all three of those pieces can be helpful when thinking about how to help other people.
Erin, I love that. I just want to cap off too. It means behind the scenes. You said behind the scenes, it really resonated with me because it means taking no credit too. Like, don't undercut the opportunity that you created, even incidentally, which I've been guilty of doing myself. Like, oh, proud to share a story, but then totally undermines the accomplishment, right? And not wanting to give that to anyone else to use against the person let them tell the story, but don't undercut the opportunity that you teed them up for. Just from personal experience, I feel so important. Don't take the credit. Love it.
Definitely. Well, as much as this conversation has been amazing and I could continue talking for another hour, we have to get wrapping up. I want to thank everyone on the panel here. And there was a question about if anyone has any language for job descriptions. Ashley has been so kind as to share a great template. So I'll make sure that that gets linked into the chat so that you can take that away, look at your existing job description, and see how you can modify it to be the best. Thank you so much, Ashley, Erin C, and Erin W for talking with us today.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
for
This was fun.
Keep building.
Thanks, everybody.
And for everybody here watching, in about 10 minutes, we will have Misha talking about how to build great performance frameworks. This is another great way to make sure that you can have a diverse company and you can fairly assess people from non-traditional backgrounds, as having a great job rubric, I think, makes it a lot easier to write your great job descriptions. So I will see everybody in 10 minutes. Thank you.